You don't have to do anything right now. You don't have to hold anything, or carry anything, or keep anything in mind. Whatever was in your hands today, whatever weight you've been turning over, you can set it down here, at the edge of this narration, the way you might set down a heavy coat just inside a doorway. Just let it rest there. You won't need it where we're going. Find the position that feels most like surrender. Not sleep yet. Just the quiet agreement to move toward it. Let your shoulders drop a little. Let your jaw unclench, just the smallest amount, the way it does when you stop remembering to hold it. Breathe in slowly, in through the nose, easy and unhurried, and let the exhale go longer than the inhale, longer than you think it needs to be, all the way out until there is a moment of real stillness at the bottom. And then let the next breath come on its own, without you asking for it, because it will. It always does. We are going somewhere tonight that has almost no wind, a place where the water is so still it has become a kind of mirror. Not a perfect mirror, but a breathing one, the way water always breathes even when it seems not to, the surface lifting and settling, in movements so small they are felt before they are seen. A place where the light shifts in colors that don't have exact names, where the air carries the faint mineral taste of a shallow inland sea, cool against the back of the throat, clean in the way that only very quiet places are clean. You are almost there. Let your eyes close the rest of the way, if they haven't already. Let your breathing slow to the pace of still water. We are almost there. The first thing you notice, stepping out onto the pavilion's deck, is the quality of the air. It comes to you slowly, the way scents do when there is no wind to carry them forcefully. Instead, they simply settle around you, patient and soft, the way fog settles, the way dusk settles, the way all the most gentle things in the world eventually arrive when you stop rushing toward them. There's a coolness here that is not cold. It is the specific coolness of air that has been resting above water for a long time. Air that has absorbed some of the water's equanimity, its long patience. You breathe it in and feel, faintly, the mineral taste of the opalescent flats at the back of your mouth. Clean and faintly chalky, like very old stone licked by a very slow river, like the inside of a shell held up to the nose. The opalescent flats stretch around you in every direction. Shallow, this sea, shallow enough that in the clearest daylight you might see the pale sediment floor shifting far below, might watch the slow passage of shadows from clouds crossing the surface. But it is evening now. The sun has set somewhere behind a low bank of cloud to the west, and it has left behind a stain of color so gradual it is impossible to say where the mauve ends and the gray begins, where the gray yields to the deep and particular blue of the sky's highest point, a blue with a little silver in it, a blue that seems to produce its own soft light from some source that has nothing to do with the sun. The pavilion floats on all of this. It is a low and patient structure, a single open room with wide doorways on each of its four sides, each doorway fitted with panels of woven reed that can be lowered or raised. Though tonight, they are all raised, all open, because there is almost no wind tonight, and the moorer has decided to let the evening in. The roof is gently curved, overhanging the deck on all sides by enough to provide shade during the day and a sense of shelter now in the dimming evening light. And the hull is the reason the pavilion is named what it is named. Below the waterline, and rising a hand's breadth above it, the hull is faced entirely in nacre tiles. They are roughly the size of a palm, each one, and they are fitted together with such care and long labor that the seams between them are nearly invisible, nearly just barely visible as pale lines in certain lights, lines that contribute to the overall sense of pattern, the way the veins of a leaf contribute to the leaf's beauty without announcing themselves. And the color of those tiles, this is the thing that changes, the thing that will keep changing all through the evening as the light changes, as the moon moves, as the angle of reflection shifts by degrees so small, no individual shift is ever perceptible, only the cumulative drift from one hue to another, one quality of shimmer to the next. Right now, in this early evening light, the nacre tiles hold a color that is mostly cream, a warm and yielding cream, but threaded through it, moving as your eyes move, as your angle of looking shifts even slightly. There are suggestions of rose and the palest possible green, and something that is almost gold, but softer than gold, more willing to yield to the surrounding colors, to blend. When the moonlight comes fully, in an hour or two, the tiles will find deeper colors, blues and silvers, and that particular interior glow that nacre has had since long before anyone gave it a name. That glow that seems to come from inside the material itself, from some quiet source it has been tending since it was still part of a living shell. You step further out onto the deck and feel immediately the way the pavilion responds to your weight. Not dramatically. There's no alarming rock or roll, just the very faintest settling, the very faintest adjustment of balance, like a long exhale, like a sleeper shifting position without waking. Beneath the soles of your feet, you can feel the water, not directly, but through the wood of the deck, through the hull, through the thin cushion of stillness between hull and surface. A barely perceptible trembling, a slow pulse, the pavilion breathing with the water breathing with everything else. The mooring line runs from a brass ring at the pavilion's bow, brass worn warm by years of handling, warm even now in the cooling evening air, and it runs in a long, gentle arc across the water's surface to buoy number 14. You can see the buoy from here, just barely. A low shape on the water, painted white once, now the color of old cream in this light, marked with its number in faded paint. The line hangs in the water more than it floats on it, its weight distributed along its length in a slow curve that the moorer finds beautiful, has always found beautiful, the way a held breath is beautiful, the way a held note is beautiful, a thing of pure suspended intention. And the sound, or rather, the near absence of sound, which is its own kind of sound, its own experience, once you learn how to receive it. The opalescent flats are quiet tonight, in the way that only very still water in the presence of very little wind can be quiet, which is to say, not silent, but hushed. Hushed at the cellular level, hushed the way the inside of a very old stone building is hushed, even when people are moving through it, even when the candles are lit and the lamps are burning. There is a reed bed somewhere to the south. You can just barely see it as a low, dark line against the evening sky, and you can just barely hear it, or rather feel it, in the same way you feel the pavilion breathing through your feet, a hushed exhalation, slow and rhythmic, not quite the sound of breath and not quite the sound of water, but something between the two, something the reed bed has been practicing for so long it has become effortless, involuntary, like a heartbeat, like the tide. And beneath all of this, at intervals, the low creak of the mooring line as the pavilion pivots, barely, barely, on its tether. A sound at the very edge of hearing. A sound that is more felt than heard, more bone than ear. A low, patient complaint from a rope that has done this for years and has learned to do it without resentment, with something that might even be called contentment. Creak. And then the long quiet after the creak. And then, much later, creak again. You are here. The opalescent flats are all around you. The evening is settling in the way that evenings do in places far from noise. Gradually, softly, like a hand resting on a shoulder, like a quilt drawn up from the foot of a bed. The moorer is inside the pavilion, moving slowly in the lamplight, and you turn toward that warm glow and step inside to begin the evening's quiet work. The interior of the pavilion is a single room, and the first thing you notice upon entering is how the lamplight behaves here. There are 2 lamps, small oil lamps in brass housings, their flames turned low, the way the moorer always keeps them in the evening, the way you might keep a voice low in a sleeping house. The light they give is warm and amber, and it does not reach the ceiling, which remains in a comfortable dimness above your head, and it does not reach the far corners, which hold their shadows patiently and without any quality of threat. Just the ordinary shadows of a small space at evening, domestic shadows, the kind that have always been there and always will be. But what the lamplight does reach is the inner wall of the hull. And this is something. This is the thing that the interior of the pavilion is, in the end, for, because the nacre tiles line the inside of the hull as well, a narrower band than on the outside, but present, deliberate, continuous, and in lamplight, they do something entirely different than what they do in moonlight or daylight. In lamplight, they warm. They take the amber glow and hold it, breathe it back slowly, not as a reflection, but as something more like an answer. The way a warm stone answers the sun's warmth hours after the sun is gone. The tiles glow softly in the lamplight, cream and ivory, and the faintest possible gold, and the waxy, cool smell of them is present everywhere in the room. Not strong, but constant. The way a scent becomes invisible when you have lived with it long enough, and then suddenly returns to you, whole and familiar and particular, the moment you stop looking for it. The moorer is sitting on a low wooden bench near the center of the room, sorting rope. This is the first task of the evening, and it is a task performed every evening with the same deliberateness, the same lack of hurry. The coiled lengths of rope that are kept aboard the pavilion, backup mooring lines, guide ropes, the cord that holds the lantern, various lengths of various weights, need to be sorted periodically by weight and by thickness, coiled again neatly, and hung on the row of cedar pegs along the inner wall above the bench. It is not urgent work. It does not need to be done tonight rather than tomorrow, or tomorrow rather than next week. But the moorer does it anyway, because there is a satisfaction in it that has nothing to do with urgency, a satisfaction that belongs entirely to the process. The feeling of rope through the hands, the weight of each coil as it settles, the slightly oily cedar scent that rises from the older lines, the way the coils stack against each other on the bench with a soft and heavy sound. You sit down on the bench beside the moorer, and without a word, because words are not needed here, were not needed here long before you arrived. You reach for a length of line and begin to sort. The rope is cool and slightly rough in your hands, and you can feel its weight immediately, the way a good rope always announces its weight honestly, with no argument, with no resistance. You run it through your fingers slowly, letting the length of it travel from the pile on one side to your lap, and then to the coil you are building on the other side. And the movement becomes rhythmic almost immediately. Not fast, never fast, just steady. The rope moving through your hands, the way water moves through quiet places, the way time moves in rooms where nothing urgent is happening. The cedar scent of the older lines rises around you both as you work. It is a warm scent, a dry scent, a scent that has no edge to it. It does not demand your attention. It simply offers itself, the way all the best scents do, and you accept it without thinking, breathing it in with each breath, letting it become part of the room's particular quality, mixing with the faint, waxy smell of the nacre tiles and the mineral coolness of the air coming in off the water and the tiny smoke scent of the lamp wicks. These smells are not competing. They have long since learned to coexist, to form a single composite atmosphere that belongs to this place and nowhere else, that would not exist anywhere else in quite this combination, this exact balance. The rope moves through your hands. The moorer's hands move with a practiced ease, a fluency earned through years of the same motion. And watching those hands without studying them is like watching water move around an obstacle. Smooth, unhurried, quietly certain. Occasionally the pavilion shifts, almost imperceptibly, and you feel it through the bench beneath you, through the floor beneath the bench. The slow settling, the adjustment, the long creak of the mooring line taking up the new angle of load. Creak, and then stillness, and then the sound of rope through hands, and then stillness again, deep and wide and full of the reed bed's distant breathing. You sort the line by weight. The thicker lines are coiled larger and hung on the higher pegs. The finer cord, the lantern cord, the thinner guide lines, coiled smaller, hung lower, where they are easy to reach. There is a logic to this arrangement that is entirely practical and also somehow beautiful, the way useful things often achieve a beauty that purely decorative things must work harder for. The arrangement of the coils on their pegs has the same rightness as the arrangement of the buoys on the flats, each one where it needs to be, each one quietly fulfilling its purpose, each one part of a system that works because all its parts are patient, and each one knows its place. The light in the room has shifted slightly while you worked. You look up and notice that the evening outside has deepened. The sky, visible through the open doorways, has moved through that particular transition that always happens faster than you expect and slower than you fear, from the blue-gray of late evening into the first true dark, the dark that is not yet the full darkness of night, but the preliminary dark, the dark that announces what is coming, the way the first low notes of music announce a melody. And in this deeper light, the first stars have appeared, just a few, the boldest ones, the ones that do not wait for full darkness to make themselves known. They are very still, those first stars, in the absence of wind, reflected in the surface of the opalescent flats, in a way that is nearly exact, nearly perfect, so that it is difficult at a glance to say with confidence where the sky ends and the water begins. The mooring line gives its slow creak again. The pavilion moves, barely, and the reflected stars on the water shift with it, just slightly, and then settle again, and the stars above remain where they always are, unchanged, unconcerned. The rope sorting is done. The coils hang on their pegs in the lamplight, the larger ones at the top, the smaller ones below, and the bench is clear, and the room feels as it always feels after this task, the moorer thinks. Organized in a way that is satisfying, not because it was disorganized before, but because there is pleasure in the act of attending to things, in the act of noticing what is there, and deciding deliberately where it belongs. The hands rest now in the lap. The cedar scent of the rope lingers. The lamps burn their low amber. The nacre tiles glow softly against the inner hull. The moorer stands, slowly, without hurry, and moves to the shelf where the polishing cloths are kept. The brass mooring rings. There are 8 of them in total, fitted at bow and stern and along the port and starboard rails, require polishing every few days. Not because the moorer is vain about the pavilion's appearance exactly, though there is a rightness to polished brass on the water that is difficult to argue with, a rightness that has to do with respect for the work the rings do, the loads they carry, the years they have been doing what they do. The polishing matters, in part, because polished brass resists corrosion better than dull brass, and the air of the opalescent flats is mineral-rich and slightly damp even on dry evenings, even on evenings like this one, when the surface of the water lies as flat and still as poured glass. And the polishing matters, in part, because it is the kind of task that asks nothing of the mind beyond presence. The simple, repeated motion, the cloth against the metal, the warmth that builds under your hand, the slow emergence of the shine from beneath the light, tarnish that the air lays down, day by day, patient as a tide. You take one of the cloths, dry and soft, the kind of soft that comes from washing many times, the nap of it worn to a smoothness that is almost silky against the palm, and you follow the moorer to the first ring, at the bow, where the mooring line connects to the pavilion and runs out across the water to buoy 14. The ring is cool to the touch at first. You bring the cloth to it and begin to move in the small circles that polishing brass requires. The circles that are not so tight, they become frantic, and not so wide, they become lazy. Just the right size of circle, the size that allows the cloth to stay in contact with the metal's curve and to work into the slight concavities around the attachment points. The warmth comes quickly, the brass warming under your hand through the cloth, and the warmth of it is pleasant in the cool evening air, is the particular comfort of a thing warmed by friction and attention, a warmth that is not the warmth of a fire or the warmth of sunlight, but something more local, more personal, a warmth that belongs to the task and to the hands performing it. And as the tarnish lifts away under the cloth, slowly, without drama, the brass does not give up its shine all at once, but yields it gradually, in the way that quiet things yield to patient attention. The color beneath is extraordinary, the way brass always is when you look at it properly, when you give it the attention of real light. Not gold. Brass is not gold, would not want to be mistaken for gold, has its own particular warmth that is richer and more complex than gold's straightforward declaration. More amber, more honey, more the color of late afternoon light filtered through the amber glass of an old window, warm and particular, and entirely itself. The polishing cloth is soft under your hand. The brass warms. The mooring line hangs from the ring in its long, gentle curve, disappearing into the water a short distance from the hull, and then reappearing, barely visible in the dimming light. As it runs the rest of the distance to buoy 14, which is now little more than a pale shape in the gathering dark, its number invisible at this distance, but its presence known, its function patient. You can feel, while you work at the ring, the faint vibration in the metal when the mooring line takes any shift of load, the pavilion settling, breathing, making its almost imperceptible adjustments on the water. The vibration is at the very edge of what can be felt, a thing so subtle it requires stillness in yourself to detect, the same quality of quiet attention required to hear a very distant sound or to feel the direction of a very faint current of air. You are still enough to feel it. There, a barely there trembling in the brass ring, and then the low creak of the line, and then stillness again, the deep and wide stillness of the opalescent flats at evening. You move along the rail to the next ring, and the next, and the next. The work is unhurried. Each ring takes as long as it takes. The cloth moves in its small circles. The warmth builds and then transfers to the air as the hands move on. The shine emerges slow and amber, and the rings behind you where you've already worked catch the lamplight from the open doorways and return it in warm points of reflection that travel across the nacre tiles as the pavilion moves, imperceptibly, on its line. Those points of light on the nacre tiles, the reflected brass warmth moving slowly across the iridescent surface of the hull panels, are something you find yourself watching between strokes of the polishing cloth, the way you might watch embers, the way you might watch the last slow turn of a leaf falling through still air. They move without intention. They move because the water moves, because the pavilion moves on the water, because the line allows a small arc of movement within the larger stillness, and the reflected light traces that arc across the tiles so slowly it is nearly possible to believe the light is not moving at all, that it is the tiles themselves shifting, the colors of nacre moving through their range in some independent rhythm of their own. Perhaps they are. The pavilion holds cream and rose and pale green and that almost gold in this light, and where the lamp reflections cross the tiles, they add a deeper warmth, a point of amber against the cooler iridescence, and the combination shifts and shifts again with each slow movement of the pavilion on its line, so that the hull is never the same twice, is always in the process of becoming whatever it will be next, always just past where it was, and just before where it will be, the way all living things always are. The last ring is polished. You lower the cloth. Your hands are warm from the brass, warmer than the air, and the warmth dissipates gradually into the evening, the way all warmth eventually dissipates, gradually and without reluctance. The 8 rings catch the light now, all 8 of them, in their stations along the rails, and the pavilion is attended to, is polished and tethered and patient on its quiet water, ready for whatever the evening will bring, which will be, as evenings here always are, more of this same quality of stillness, more of this same unhurried dark. The moorer has gone back inside. You linger a moment at the bow, your hand resting on the now warm brass of the forward ring, and you look out over the flats. The moon has risen. You did not see the exact moment it cleared the horizon. It announced itself instead through its effect on the water, the way things often announce themselves, not directly, but through what they change. And the change is this: the opalescent flats have become a different kind of surface since you last looked at them. In the evening light before moonrise, the water was dark and reflective in the way of a mirror in a dim room, holding only the vaguest impressions of the sky above it. Now, in the moon's light, it has become something else, something more active, more alive in its stillness. It reflects the moonlight not flatly, but with a kind of depth, the way silver reflects, the way ice reflects, with a shimmer that is not restless, but is not entirely still either, that breathes at the surface in a way that suggests everything happening below. And the nacre tiles in the moonlight do what they were always going to do. You see it happening on the hull below the bow rail, happening to the entire visible surface of the hull as you look along it toward the stern. The colors shift, the daytime warmth of cream and rose yielding to the moonlight's cooler alchemy, to silver and the deepest blue-white, and a color that is neither blue nor green, but holds both without committing to either. And beneath all of these, pulsing through all of these, that interior glow that nacre has always had, the glow that seems to answer moonlight from the inside, as though the tiles and the moon are in conversation, speaking in a language of light that predates language, that predates all the systems and habits and urgencies of the waking world. The hull of the pavilion, in full moonlight on the opalescent flats, is a thing of such quiet beauty that looking at it for a long time becomes a kind of rest in itself, a rest for the eyes, a rest for the part of the mind that is always classifying and naming and accounting for things, because the nacre does not stay still long enough to be named. Any name you found for a color would be obsolete in the next moment. The tiles move through their range at the pace of the moon and the water, and the almost imperceptible drift of the pavilion on its mooring. And the only appropriate response is to stop naming and simply receive, to let the eyes soften and the mind soften, and take in the shifting light the way you take in warmth, not grasping, not cataloging, just open, just present, just here. You are here. Inside, the moorer has lifted the small lantern from its hook above the doorway facing south, the doorway that looks toward the reed bed, toward that low, dark line, and its hushed exhalation that has been present all evening, there in the near distance, regular as breath, quieter than breath. The lantern is small enough to fit in both hands cupped together, a glass and brass construction, its candle lit and steady inside, and it hangs from a length of cord, the same cord you handled earlier when sorting the lines, the finer cord that was coiled on the lower pegs, a cord long enough that the lantern, when lowered over the side, will reach the water and rest there or just below the surface, sending its light down into the shallow depths of the flats. This is an evening ritual. Every evening, when the light is gone and the moon is up and the water is in its night state, the moorer lowers the lantern on its cord to the water's surface and watches its light travel down into the flats. It was done the first night on the pavilion, years ago now, out of curiosity, out of wonder at what the nacre-colored bottom sediment would look like, illuminated from above, and it became, without any decision being made, something that must happen each evening, a punctuation to the day, a marking of the transition from the work of evening to the deeper rest that follows. You kneel at the edge of the deck, beside the moorer, and together you lower the lantern on its cord over the side of the pavilion, down toward the water. The cord passes through your hands slowly. There is that cedar scent again, faint now, the cord having spent its day near the older ropes. And then, without ceremony, without announcement, the lantern touches the water. The sound it makes is small and exact, a soft plunk, the sound of something light and purposeful meeting still water, the sound the water makes accepting an object into its surface, a sound that exists for only the fraction of a moment when contact is made and the surface is broken, and the ripples begin to travel outward in their perfect circles, too slow to seem urgent, too regular to seem accidental, just the water doing what water does when asked, responding with its characteristic generosity, and the light. As the lantern settles at the surface, held there by the cord, hovering between the world above and the world below, its light fans out beneath the water, in a cone that shifts and breathes with the water's barely perceptible movement. The bottom of the flats in this area is pale, silted, mineral pale, a color that daylight would call cream or gray, but that the lantern's amber warmth turns to something richer, something closer to the color of old paper or old maps, the color of things that have been patient for a very long time. And across that pale bottom, the lantern light plays in the slow, undulating patterns that moving water makes of any light source. Not quickly, not restlessly, just the gentle pulse and shift of light on a surface that is mostly still, but not entirely still, that breathes the same way the reed bed breathes, the same way the pavilion breathes, the same way you breathe, right now, slow and steady and long. The ripples from the lantern's landing have traveled out and out and out until they are too small to see. The water is still again, or as still as it gets, which is the stillness of something that is never completely without motion, but has learned to hold its motion so gently it can pass for stillness, the way very deep calm in a person can pass, to a casual eye, for blankness. And the lantern hangs at the surface, and the light fans below, and the pale bottom glows with it, amber and shifting and hushed, and you and the moorer look down into it for a long time without speaking, because there is nothing to say that the light is not already saying. Far to the south, the reed bed breathes. The mooring line gives its low creak. The nacre tiles of the hull glow with moonlight on one side and lamplight on the other, and the whole pavilion is caught between two kinds of light tonight, the cold silver of the moon and the warm amber of the lamps. And where those two lights meet at the doorways and the open sides, they blend into something that has no name, something that is just the light of this particular evening on the opalescent flats, the light that will never exist in quite this way again, and does not need to. After a long while, not a measured while, not a counted while, just the while that feels right when you are not keeping track, when you have given the task of keeping track to something larger than yourself. You draw the lantern cord back up through your hands, and the lantern rises from the water with a small sound, a droplet or two falling back from its base, the candle flame inside entirely undisturbed, burning with its quiet intention, as though nothing unusual has happened, as though it has not just been suspended above an illuminated seafloor with the entirety of the opalescent flats pressing gently at at its glass. The lantern is hung back on its hook. The cord is coiled and hung on its peg. And you and the moorer sit in the open south doorway, side by side, and let the evening settle around you like something that's been waiting to settle and is only now being allowed to. The quality of silence above still water is a subject the moorer has thought about for a long time, not in the way of puzzles to be solved or questions to be answered, but in the way of something beautiful that rewards continued attention, the way a piece of music rewards repeated listening, not by yielding new information, but by revealing new depths in what was already there. You sit in the south doorway, your feet resting on the deck just above the water, the warm cedar-scented wood of the doorframe at your back, and you attend to the silence together, you and the moorer, cataloging it the way you might catalog weather, not formally, not with tools, but with the patient attention of someone who has decided that this thing is worth the time it takes to truly notice. The first thing you notice about the silence is that it is not a single thing. It is layered. The outermost layer, the one you encounter first when you stop talking and stop moving and let your own sounds subside, is the distant layer, the reed bed's exhalation, which has been there all evening, but which becomes, now that you are specifically attending to it, something more complex than you had registered. It is not a continuous sound. It is a breathing sound, a rise and a fall, a time of slight fullness, and then a time of slight emptiness, as though the reed bed is genuinely breathing, as though it is a single organism with a single slow respiratory rhythm that has nothing to do with the wind, which is absent tonight, and everything to do with the water level and the way the reeds respond to the water's long patience. You listen to that breath, in and out. The interval between is long, longer than a human breath, longer than you would expect, and during that interval, the silence deepens, is heard more clearly for being preceded and followed by the reed bed's soft sound. Beneath that outermost layer is the middle layer, and the middle layer is water. Still water is not silent. Still water makes sounds at a register and at a scale that requires stillness in the listener to hear, and the sounds it makes are small and various and utterly without pattern, not like music, which has intention, not like rain, which has rhythm, but the sounds of a substance that is always at work on itself, always making tiny adjustments to its own surface, to its own internal pressures, to the demands made of it by the infinitesimal currents that persist even when all visible motion has ceased. A tap at the hull, barely a tap, more the suggestion of a tap, a ripple from some undetermined origin reaching the hull and announcing itself to the nacre tiles in a sound too small to have a name. A breath of air, even smaller than the evening's general air, crossing the surface somewhere nearby and leaving a line of tiny sounds behind it, each one the sound of a water molecule meeting air, or the aggregate sound of thousands of such meetings, so many and so brief that together they make the soft hiss of a page being turned. And beneath the middle layer is the deepest layer, and the deepest layer is the pavilion itself. The pavilion makes sounds. It makes the low creak of the mooring line, which you have heard all evening, which you have come to expect, and therefore to include in the structure of silence rather than the structure of sound. The way the clock in a familiar room is heard only when it stops. It makes the soft, nacre-on-nacre sound of the tiles when the hull shifts, a sound at the border of hearing, cool and faintly crystalline, like the sound of very fine glass touching very fine glass, like the sound of ice shifting in a glass of water, except without the sharpness, without any edge, all smoothness, all the rounded sound of curved surfaces meeting. It makes the sound of the wood itself, expanding and contracting with the temperature changes of evening. Sounds so small, they are felt more than heard, felt through the floor and the door frame, and the soles of the feet resting on the warm deck. Together, these layers compose what the moorer understands as the silence of the opalescent flats, not the absence of sound, but the presence of sound at its most patient, sound that does not announce itself or demand attention, but simply exists, the way the flats themselves exist, vast and shallow, and entirely content to be what they are, to do what they do, to receive the moonlight and breathe with the seasons, and hold the pavilion on its long mooring line without complaint, without impatience, without any desire whatsoever to be different from what they are. You breathe out slowly. The reed bed breathes. The mooring line creaks. The nacre tiles shift through some new combination of moonlight and shadow that you cannot quite see from your angle in the doorway, but can feel as a change in the light, a slight deepening of the silver, a slight brightening of that interior glow the tiles carry in their dense and patient material. The stars above the flats are fully out now, more of them than seemed possible when they first began to appear. Not the few bold ones of early evening, but the full count, the deeper stars, the ones that require true dark to be seen, the ones that appear only when the human eye has rested in darkness long enough to open all the way, to dilate to its full capacity for receiving light. The opalescent flats reflect all of them. The water holds the stars in its still surface with such precision that the reflection is only distinguishable from the original by the faintest wavering. The slow breath of the water making the reflected stars just barely softer, just barely less sharp than the ones overhead. The difference between a word spoken clearly and the same word spoken through closed hands, both entirely intelligible, both themselves just slightly different in texture. You and the moorer sit in the south doorway, and neither of you moves, and the evening holds you both in it the way still water holds a stone on its bottom, not pressing, not gripping, just surrounding, just present, just there. In time, the moorer rises, not because it is time to rise, not because a bell has rung, or a change has been noticed in the sky or in the water, just because the body knows, in the way the body always knows in quiet places when it has been still long enough, that a change of position would be good. That movement after stillness is its own pleasure, carries its own quality of sensation. The warmth returning to the limbs, the subtle readjustment of every muscle and joint, the breath shifting with a change in posture. The moorer moves to the small, low table near the center of the pavilion's room, where a bowl has been set out. A wide, shallow bowl, white ceramic, with a rim worn slightly rough by years of handling. The kind of bowl that is not beautiful in any deliberate sense, but that has become beautiful through use. Through the particular way use reveals the character of a material. The way the ceramic catches the lamplight slightly differently on its worn rim than on its intact glaze. The way it sits on the table with the settled confidence of an object that that knows exactly where it is and is comfortable there. Beside the bowl, a small ceramic pot holds water. Water that has been warming all evening on the small iron stand above the oil lamp at the room's eastern end. Water that is now, after all those hours of gentle heat, exactly right. Not hot, not warm precisely, but the temperature that is indistinguishable from body temperature. The temperature at which water seems to disappear against the skin, to become part of the skin rather than something external to it. And in a cloth pouch on the table beside the pot, the dried marsh flowers. These are flowers the moorer has gathered from the edge of the reed bed, dried slowly over several days, and then stored in the cloth pouch. And their smell when the pouch is opened is something particular, something that belongs to this place as much as the mineral taste of the air or the waxy smell of the nacre tiles. Dry and papery, that scent, the scent of something once living that has been preserved at the moment of its fullest self. The oils in the flower petals concentrated by the drying process into something more intense than the live-in flower's scent, but also more settled, more patient, more willing to release itself slowly rather than all at once. A little sweet, a little green beneath the sweetness, a little of the water the flowers grew in, somehow still present after the drying. The ghost of water in a dried flower, the mineral memory of the flats. The moorer pours the warm water into the bowl slowly, and the water makes a quiet sound as it fills the ceramic. Not a pour sound exactly, something lower than that, something more like a settling in, a sound that the water makes as it moves from one vessel to another and encounters the new shape and accepts it without resistance. The water in the bowl catches the lamplight and holds it, amber on white ceramic, and the surface of the water in the bowl is, like the surface of the flats outside, mostly still, not entirely still, still moving gently from the pour, the last of the circular motion slowing and slowing as the water settles into its new container, into its shallow circular world. Then, the marsh flowers, from the cloth pouch, a small handful, the right amount, the amount that the moorer knows from repetition to be right. They are dropped gently onto the water's surface, and they float. Dried flowers always carry enough air in their papery structure to float, at least at first, at least until the water works its way fully in, and the flower accepts the water's weight and begins, slowly, to sink. But that will take some time, and for now, they float. And as they float, the warm water reaches them, and the scent releases. You can smell it immediately, or almost immediately, that papery green sweetness, that dried flower scent, entering the air of the pavilion room and mixing with the cedar and the nacre and the mineral air from outside and the lamp smoke. The smell of dried marsh flower releasing in warm water is specific and complete. It announces itself without urgency and settles without fading, takes its place in the room's composite atmosphere with the confidence of something that belongs. You breathe it in, and again. Each breath brings it to you a little more fully, and each breath carries it a little deeper. And after a little while, the smell is simply part of the air you are breathing, no longer noticed as a separate thing, but integrated, woven in, inseparable from the rest. And now, the moorer lifts a single candle, white, short, the kind that burns for several hours before guttering, and lights it at the flame of one of the oil lamps, and then sets it on a small round raft made of cork, barely larger than the candle's base. A piece of cork that has been cut and shaped for exactly this purpose, and has been used for this purpose many times. The cork surface stained slightly with old wax at its center. The candle on its cork raft is placed on the surface of the bowl, and it floats. It floats, and its flame, tiny, so tiny, a flame so small, it is really just the idea of a flame reduced to its essential nature, its minimum requirement of light and heat, burns without any flicker. There is no wind inside the pavilion tonight. The flame is perfectly still, and the tiny raft turns very slowly on the surface of the water in the bowl, turned by a current too small to see, a current that is simply the last very slow memory of the pour, the very last echo of movement in the water, so attenuated now, so close to stillness, that the raft's turning is barely a turning at all, more the suggestion of turning, the ambiguity between still and not still, the place where the two states meet and linger without resolving. You watch the candle on its raft. The flame does not flicker. The marsh flowers float around the raft, papery and small. The water in the bowl is very still, or very nearly still, and the candle turns very slowly, turns, and gradually, as the last of the water's memory of motion dissipates, as the bowl's gentle ceramic certainty reasserts itself, the turning slows and slows, and the raft moves less and less, and finds, not at any particular moment, not with any announcement, just gradually, and with the quiet authority of a thing that has arrived at its right place, a stillness at the center of the bowl. The candle rests. The flame burns. The marsh flowers breathe their warm, papery scent into the air around the bowl, into the air of the room, into the air of the evening, and the Moor sits back on the low bench beside the table and looks at the candle in its bowl, and the looking has the quality of looking at still water, soft-eyed, receiving, not grasping at what is seen, but letting it enter through the eyes, the way warmth enters through the skin. You sit beside the moorer. The bowl is between you, the candle burning at its center, the marsh flowers at the edges, the warm water holding all of it with its characteristic quiet generosity. The lamplight is low around you. The nacre tiles glow silver and blue-white in the moonlight coming through the open doorways, and they glow amber gold in the lamplight from the lamps at the room's center. And the two lights meet on the tiles and make something neither one is alone. Outside, the reed bed breathes. The mooring line gives its slow and patient creak. The stars on the water hold themselves in their soft, reflected positions, just barely different from the stars above, just soft enough at their edges to be distinguishable from the real thing. And the real thing hangs overhead, far above the curved roof of the pavilion, far above the opalescent flats, in the deep and ancient silence of the sky. You breathe, slow. The warm marsh flower scent is all around you. The candle burns. The evening has passed through all its stages and arrived here, arrived at this. The candle in the bowl, the still water, the moorer's quiet breath beside you, the nacre tiles and their long, slow conversation with the moonlight, the cedar scent of the coiled rope on its pegs, the warmth of polished brass, remembered in the hands, even though the hands are resting now, are open in the lap, are doing nothing and needing to do nothing. There is a particular quality that settles into a room when the evening's tasks are all completed. You have felt it before in other rooms, other evenings, but here on the pavilion, it is more present, more available, more completely itself than it is in places where the day is longer, and the to-do list extends beyond the horizon. Here, the tasks were exactly the right number. The rope, the brass rings, the lantern lowered on its cord, the bowl of warm water, the dried marsh flowers, the candle on its cork raft finding stillness at the center. These are the day's tasks completed, and the completion is entire. There's nothing left undone. There's nothing requiring attention. The pavilion is tethered and polished and attended to. The mooring line runs its long curve to buoy 14, which is doing its patient work in the dark, holding the pavilion's radius, keeping the pavilion within the quiet geography the moorer has defined. Tomorrow at dawn, the line will be moved to buoy 15, and the pavilion will drift very slowly to a new position within the flats, a position only slightly different from this one. The same water in all directions, the same sky, the same reed bed to the south, but different in the particular angle of morning light, different in the exact quality of the reflection, different in whatever way slightly new always differs from what came before. But that is tomorrow. Tomorrow does not concern you now. The candle in the bowl burns. Its flame is very still. The marsh flowers have settled lower in the water as the water has worked its way fully into their papery structure, and some of them have sunk to the bottom of the bowl entirely. There below the warm water, releasing their scent from below the surface now, and the scent rises through the water and into the air above, and enters your breath without your asking for it, without your having to do anything at all. Everything has arrived at stillness. You don't need to hold your eyes open now. They are heavy in the way eyes are heavy when they have seen enough, when they have taken in all they needed to take in and are ready, more than ready, to rest. Let them close. Let the candle's amber afterimage hold itself in the warm dark behind your eyelids for a moment. Just a warm point of amber in the dark, soft at its edges, and then let that soften too. The reed bed breathes. Slow. You can still hear it, or you can feel it. The distinction blurs at the edge of sleep. That long exhalation from the south. The sound of something very large and very patient doing what it has always done. The mooring line. Its low creak. The pavilion settling on the still water. The water receiving the pavilion's weight the way it always does, with room, with depth, with patience. The nacre tiles, beyond your closed eyes, doing their slow work in the moonlight, shifting through their colors at the pace of the moon across the sky, blue, white, and silver, and that deep interior glow, colors that have no names and do not require them. The scent of marsh flower in warm water, here in your breath, here, the warmth of the room, low and steady, the warmth of the deck through the floor, the wood still holding something of the day's heat, giving it back slowly and without reluctance, the warmth of the brass rings remembered in your hands, the warmth of the lamp burning low, your breath, slow, in through the nose, and the long way out. The flats are so still tonight, so still. The water and the sky have agreed to be mirrors of each other, and between them, in the middle of that mutual reflection, the pavilion floats. And inside the pavilion, you are resting. The mooring line holds. It always holds. There's nothing you need to keep in mind, nothing you need to track. The line runs to buoy 14. 14 is doing its work. The pavilion is where it needs to be. Let the line take the weight of that. Let the water take the weight of the line. Let the flats take the weight of the water. Let all of it rest. The candle has been burning in the bowl for some time now. The marsh flowers float, and some have sunk, and the warm water holds its scent. The candle will burn for another hour or two before it quietly goes out. You will not be awake to see it go out. The reed bed breathes. The tiles glow. The line is slow, low, creak, and then the stillness, wide and warm, and entirely yours. The opalescent flats are all around you in the dark behind your eyes. You can feel them. All that quiet water, all those miles of shallow, patient, mineral pale water holding the moonlight gently on its surface. And somewhere on that surface, a small pavilion, tethered, nacre tiles, glowing, and inside, the warm marsh flower air, and your breath, slow and slower, and the water breathing with you, and the reeds, and the line, and the moonlight on all that nacre, shifting slowly and slowly, and still.